Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Southern Stock Podcast. This is our first episode, and I'm joined here with author of Southern Stock, Gena Elliott. And this first episode, we're just going to introduce Gina, kind of have her talk about the book, kind of the backstory behind it, and kind of what this podcast is all about. So, Gina, do you want to introduce yourself? So, you are a writer. This is your first publication, correct?
Yes, that's correct. First
So why
published
did
book.
you choose to do Southern Stock first? Kind of tell me about the legacy of behind this book and a little bit about the background story of your dad, Stick Elliott.
All right. So I grew up always hearing these wild and crazy stories about my dad. He was kind of a local celebrity in North, South Carolina, Georgia, all the southern racetracks, dirt tracks mostly. He raced NASCAR with Dale Earnhardt, Ralph Earnhardt, some of the bigger names that a lot of people recognize. And I in hearing these stories, some of them were just so crazy. I'm like, this has to be a book. I have to write, I have to write this down, get this down on paper. So it was during COVID. Took the time. I had written an essay in college about my dad. And I brought that back out and I was looking at him like, this could be a piece of the book. So it actually started kind of in the middle of the book. And then I wrote the entire book around it during COVID.
Why this book first? So tell me about your background in writing a little bit and why did you choose to, why was this the first book?
So I've always loved writing, even from like when I was a little kid. I think it was just cathartic. I would go sit in my closet and just write poetry and fiction, always fiction. Right after college, I did work for the Spartanburg Herald Journal, which is a New York Times syndicated company, and I did lifestyle sort of stories, some sports, and I really like that. But my heart was always in fiction. So I think I was just looking at this as, I feel like we're kind of living in this world where everything is curated, right? Like we're trying to be perfect. Everybody's social media pages are curated, their whole lives are curated. And I feel like people are really craving something authentic. And that is exactly what my dad was. I mean, the time period, the story is set from 1950s up to 1980 when he passed. And I think that was just a very an authentic time period that I think people are craving that. My dad was this larger than life public figure that some people hated and some people loved, but regardless, they respected him. But he also had this like wild side and this jokester side, but he was a good old boy. He was truly authentic, and I felt like now's the time for this story.
What was that defining story that you heard about him that was like, yep, now I need to write a book about it?
So there's so many stories about him driving backwards and winning backwards and driving with three wheels, and the steering wheel came off, and all broken leg, and all sorts of stuff. But there was one story where and it's related to Dale Earnhardt, a teenage Dale Earnhardt. They were driving, and my dad was kind of the older one. Dale was a little bit younger at this time, and Dale had an aggressive driving style, which he learned from my dad. And he clipped my dad, and my dad spun out or something and got really angry. And at the end of the race, he and his whole pit crew came over, and it was kind of like in the movies where they had their wrenches and their all their tools, and they were kind of like heading over to, it looked like they were going to beat him up or something. And they walk over, and my dad's really serious, and he gets really close to Dale Earnhardt's face, and he goes, "Boy, you might make a driver yet." And I thought that was a really cool story. I'm like, yep, now it's time. The documentary about Dale Earnhardt just came out, and that was a huge hit. All these movies about racing and all the documentaries are coming out about NASCAR. I was like, this is the time.
And what were some of the cool discoveries that you made along the way? And actually, I see there's a picture of your dad behind you there. This is when
Yep,
he was racing in at the time called the NASCAR Grand National Series, the modern day Cup Series.
that's right.
Um, Now, differentiate his career between NASCAR and then also in dirt racing, because his fame and career mostly came from dirt racing, though he did race in NASCAR Cup for a handful of years and had some good finishes too.
Yeah, actually, he did. his heart was always in the dirt track. I mean, he started out as running moonshine for his grandfather. So that's where he really learned to drive, is evading the cops on the back roads of North and South Carolina, right? So that was, I think the dirt track was just a natural fit for him. He liked the grit of it. He thought it was a lot more difficult type driving. He got into NASCAR because that's where the money was. It was just starting up and people were making good money in that. He raced a couple cars. He actually raced for Ralph Earnhardt when Ralph Earnhardt had his heart attack event.
Hmm.
And he told everybody, he said, "There's nobody getting in my car except for Stick Elliott." So he ran some at Daytona. He played around with a little bit, had a couple of pretty decent finishes, but just never really. His heart was never really in it as much as it was the dirt track.
Yeah, and his best finishes in the NASCAR series were at the dirt tracks like
Yeah,
Riverside and some of those other tracks.
that's right.
Um, but he had a really impressive dirt career. In fact, from 67 through 69, when he raced with Toy Bolton was his car owner, which
That's
is
right.
also who's his car owner in the NASCAR Series 2. Um, in just that 2 year stretch from 67 to 69, he won 106 races.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And that
And
was in the, I think that was in the, was that in the 57, I think?
I believe so. And
Yeah,
yeah, in that singular car, and I mean, just unstoppable. And credited with somewhere around north of 400 career wins in the Dirt Series. 2009, he was inducted into
dirt
the
track.
Dirt Late Model Hall of
Yep.
Fame. Um, so, like, I mean, he was basically the Richard Petty of dirt racing. In fact, and we'll plug some of our merch later, but we made this. I made this design for some of our merch. We've been nicknaming him the King of Dirt because he essentially was. I don't think
That's
there's
right.
anyone that really came close to his career stats when it came to dirt. One thing I wanted to ask you about for the book, it is based on a true story, but you do mix in just some cool historical fiction in there too. Kind of walk me through how you wanted to um, lay this book out and kind of mix the two a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So I would say about 80% of the book is true. But I was a little kid when my dad passed, so I didn't know a lot of his friends, his crew members, some of the personalities in the book. So I I I talked to a lot of his friends. I talked to some old crew members that were still alive, some of the older drivers and sponsors and promoters and people that knew him. And I based all of the characters upon real people. Um, but for instance, I changed the name in the book. I changed my mom's name. I changed my sister's name just for privacy. There's a driver by the name of Wendell Scott, which everybody will know is the first African American driver in NASCAR, and I changed his name in the book. But my dad did know him, and he raced with him, and had a really good working relationship with him, and they both had a good reputation. And then there are other things in the book that I just embellished on a little bit. I know that, for instance, he was running moonshine, and there was a big group of moonshiners that lived down in the Charleston area in the Low Country. And they were, I call them in the book, just kind of like swamp hillbillies, right?
Hmm.
And they were making moonshine in a very particular sort of way using maple syrup and some different things. And they were shipping it to Al Capone up in Chicago. And in real life, my dad was sort of involved in that, in the fact that when they would ship this moonshine from Low Country up to Chicago, they would use these trains that my dad's grandfather worked on, and my dad was the night manager for the trains, my night security for the trains, and he would go by and he would assure that all of this moonshine, which was created in maple syrup, would make it up to Capone by just kind of turning the other cheek and ignoring the whole situation. So that's the true story. My dad was kind of not directly involved in that, but he was definitely at a young age over at the railroad station and kind of saw all that and knew what was happening. In the book, I just embellished it a little bit and had my dad actually go down to the Low Country and kind of get through the swamp and meet all of these hillbillies, and it just made for a fun part of the story.
What were some of the notable connections you made along the way while you were writing the book?
I reached out to a lot of his crew members. I'm trying to get in touch with Dale Earnhardt Jr. because there's definitely a connection there.
Dale Jr.,
Um,
if you're watching this,
Dale Jr., if you're
we'd love to
watching
connect.
this, please, please.
And you sent him a nice letter recently with a picture, correct?
I did. I sent him a nice letter with a picture of himself as a teenage boy at the dirt tracks at one of my dad's races. I think it would have been like a memorial race. It might have been after he passed. But yeah, there he was. But you know, my dad raced with Kel Yarborough. He raced with Richard Petty, who was kind of the king at that time, right?
Right.
Of NASCAR at least. Like I said, Ralph Earnhardt, a young, very young Dale Earnhardt looked up to him. In fact, there's a Time magazine article where Dale Earnhardt references my dad as a very aggressive sort of driver that kind of, he kind of modeled some of his driving after.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, as you were writing this book, what did you find to be the most challenging aspect of it?
Mm. I think the most challenging aspect was not, I enjoyed writing the book. This particular book took me about 6 months to write and 6 months of editing. And I take criticism from editors and things, I take it very seriously. So that part was easy. I think the most challenging part was not writing the book, but the aftermath and trying to market it. Because as with any sort of art, whether it's a painting or it's a book or it's a song, there are people that are going to love it and there are people that are just not going to like it. So you're going to get some
Hmm.
criticism. And at first, I kind of had a tough time with that because this book was so near and dear to my heart, and it is about my dad. And I put
Right.
everything that I had into it. And to see that kind of criticism at times, which wasn't a lot, but at times I would get it, that was tough. But I was raised right, as my dad said, and I have some grit. So I've learned to just kind of ignore those and just go, okay, well, some love it and some don't.
Now, kind of the opening tagline of the book is, "What do Dale Earnhardt, Elvis, and Moonshine have in common?" Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So they all knew my dad. All these moonshiners, these bootleggers, they all knew him because he was really racing. He was really bootlegging quite a bit. Dale Earnhardt, the connection there is obvious.
Hmm.
He was kind of a mentor along with Ralph Earnhardt, his own dad. But my dad was also kind of a mentor and one of those older drivers that Dale Earnhardt looked up to. Um, and Elvis. So my dad was actually the stunt driver for Elvis in the movie Speedway, starring Nancy Sinatra. And there's even a story about my dad where he actually met Elvis Presley. And Elvis said, "Can you take me for a drive, a fast drive?" And he's like, "All right, buckle up." And Elvis got in the car. And the story was Elvis was really nervous when he got out of the car. He said he had a great time, but he was basically like just gripping the gripping the sides of the car the entire time because my dad drove so fast and so aggressively.
Actually, that kind of goes into the next question I wanted to
Okay.
ask you was, what's your favorite true story about Stick?
Oh, favorite true story. God, there's so many. The Dale Earnhardt one's a big one. There's a story of my dad where I forget which track it is, but it's some dirt track in the South, and he's racing, and he comes around and what's happening is people are shooting at him and there's these bullets like dinging off the side of the car and he just keeps racing. But every time, I think it was turn 3, every time he goes around turn 3, he realizes finally that he's getting shot at, because I think at first he's like, what is happening, what is going on? He was just hearing all this like loud noise, and then the bullet casing comes in the car. And so at the end of the race, I forget whether he won or what, but at the end of the race, the crew comes over and they're like, "You were driving crazy on that third turn. Like, what was going on?" And he's like, "Man, I was getting shot at." And come to find out, it was these guys who were some of these moonshiners down from the swamp
Hmm.
who just didn't like him because he was doing a good job and they were racing too, and they were trying to get started into racing, and all anybody could ever talk about was Stick Elliott and how good Stick Elliott was, and they were pissed off.
They had had enough of it.
They had enough of it. That was it. They're like, we're going to get rid of this guy one way or the other. We can't beat him, so we're just going to kill him, I guess.
So he was successful both on and off the track.
Yeah, he definitely was. He definitely was. You know, he sold a lot of his belongings to get started. At the very beginning, he sold. I think there's a quote from him where he sold like a house and 100 acres of land and a couple mules, like to get started. So he really struggled financially for a while, and even worked in construction and all of that as well. But yeah, he was successful on and off the track. You know, Hollywood.
And the racing landscape was quite a bit different back then than it is today. I mean, obviously sponsors existed, but if you wanted to start something up, you had to dig in. And now, there's so many sponsorship opportunities that it's really possible. And there's a lot of programs out there too for young racers, like what they have in like the ARCA series and stuff like that. And but now, I mean, back then it was a completely different game. Like if you wanted to get out and race, you had to build all that yourself, and you had to front all of that cash up yourself and really work on the cars yourself. And it was really hands-on and pretty much put your whole life on the line to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, these guys didn't have big sponsors back then, especially starting out. I think my dad started out with just an old Ford that his grandfather gave him. And he went to the junkyard. There's actually a scene in the book where he goes to the junkyard and he just finds different parts. He finds a steering wheel from one thing, some tires from another car, junk car, a carburetor, all the different parts. And he just builds this like Franken car, basically.
Hmm.
And then you pull up at the track, and that's what all these guys have. They have these beat up looking, not perfectly polished, glossy paint Franken cars. And that's what they raced with. And a lot of times they forgot that their moonshine was still hidden in the back. So they would start to race. They'd open up their trunk and they're like, oh crap. And they have to go hide the moonshine. So I think that's pretty funny. But yeah, no, these guys really were just, they were, I mean, even if you look at the story of Dale Earnhardt when he started out and Ralph Earnhardt, like at the very beginning, they just weren't making very much money.
Yep.
The difference between back then, the difference between first place and second place was whether your family got fed dinner
Right.
that night.
And hence why, I think the aggression that you saw on track was just also different. I mean, now it's, you have to get good finishes to get certain sponsorship payouts and all that stuff, and they just want like a good solid point stay. But back then it was, like you said, winning meant everything.
It was survival.
It was survival. So one scene I remember from the book is when you were talking about him going to the junkyard and picking up just building like a Franken car from all these different parts. I remember when I don't remember what race it was, but his uncle was saying, "Hey, you're gonna need some upgrades here in your car," and told him you're gonna want a padded steering wheel.
Yeah.
And I just remember just that part where it was like that was a big upgrade for him, and now like you wouldn't even think twice about that now, just because the way that racing is now, there's so many rules and regulations that everything is built to be more or less the exact same. But back then it was like what you found is what you used, and if you
What you
could
found
find
is
something
what.
that it was
Yeah,
crazy.
that's exactly right. And he's like, they're talking about like roll bars and all this stuff, and he's like, "What the hell is that?" He's just like, "Dude, I'm just gonna get in, climb in this car and race. Like that's all I want to do." And I think when he started doing NASCAR, so when they would race dirt, I think they didn't have windshields because it would be impossible to race because the red mud would like
And they
pile
didn't
up
have
on the
they didn't
windshield,
have
and
peel
there's
offs at
no
the
wind.
time.
Yeah, and there's no windshield wipers. So, and it wouldn't have made much sense to have windshield wipers anyway. It wouldn't have done. It would have just smeared the mud all over the
Yeah.
place. So they didn't have windshields back then when they were racing in the dirt track. So they just had these goggles that they would put on and with their helmets, and the goggles would get all messy, and they just keep a rag in the car and just wipe the goggles off. And they did come up with some things where they had like later in the 80s and 70s and 80s where they had goggles that would have these strips that you could just rip the
Hmm.
strips off
Basically,
and
what the windshields have now in
yeah,
racing.
exactly.
That takes eating dirt to a whole new level, whole
Yeah.
new meaning there. Now, tell me a little bit about kind of what your dream is with this book long term. There's been some interest that, and we've talked about this kind of, behind the scenes a little bit of kind of this dream of turning this book into some type of a motion picture. Tell me more about that dream and kind of what you would like to see become of this book long term.
Yeah, that is definitely the dream. I think it could be a great movie or Netflix series even. And I have had some interest from Fox, has requested the manuscript. Also a couple of other channels. It's a tough business to get into, but I do think it has the cinematic quality and the plot is really fast. I mean, you're talking cars and women and,
Hmm.
wild stories, and it just in car chases, all of this stuff. It just makes for a great moonshine. It makes for a great movie. I mean, I already have like people I have picked out. They're going to play my dad. So,
Yeah, let's hear about that. What's your
um,
what's your dream cast lineup?
for my dad, I'm going with Channing Tatum, especially like my young dad, like Channing Tatum with the head shave, that
There
one.
is a striking similarity.
Yes, I think so. And the right build, like what? My dad was 6'4", so Channing Tatum is like about that same height. It's the same sort of kind of big build that my dad had. I think that would be great. For my mom, I don't know. She was just a beautiful, dark-haired, timeless beauty. So somebody kind of classic to play her. I don't know. Um, Behind the
Lana Del
scenes,
Rey.
we
I
had.
don't know, that's a singer, but
That's what you think? That's where you're going with? Yeah, I'm going with some or Anne Hathaway,
right.
somebody like that, just kind of classically beautiful. It'd be fun to also cast some of those members of the crew.
Uh-huh.
Some of those little wiry kind of guys that would,
Yeah.
change the tires and all that kind of stuff. And so that'd be fun to cast as well.
What's the feedback been like on the book so far?
The feedback has been overwhelmingly great. It's been amazing. I would say the majority of people that have read it is like, wow, this is everything I thought it was going to be in terms of like fast paced plot, but then the love story was kind of surprising to them and they liked it. I think people are liking the fact that it's gritty and it's raw.
Hmm.
It's a story, like I said, that people have been craving something authentic, and that's what you got. You got a good old boy. You've got the Dukes of Hazzard. I don't know if you remember that show,
Yeah, yeah.
but the Dukes of Hazzard, like basically that's who my dad was. There's even a newspaper article on that about they called him the original Dukes of Hazzard because the cops would chase him and they couldn't catch him, and they knew it was him. You would hear him on the CB radio, and they'd be like, "We got Stick going up Highway 9," and the people were responding like, "You got eyes on him? Can you get him?" They're like, "Nope, that boy's going too fast."
Man.
Yeah, crazy. They could never catch him. There's some of those wild stories in the book too, where they tried and he would
Well,
like
in fact,
jump a ravine
that's the
or
opening scene of the book.
that's the opening scene of the book. Yep. Yep. Well, the real opening scene of the book is him suspended upside down in a
That's
car.
true.
That's the
Yes.
opening scene. So and then you flash back and then it goes into the past.
I remember actually that I don't know how long ago this was. This has got to be somewhere around 8 to 10 years ago. I sent a tweet to NASCAR and I said, how cool would it be? I think this was right after I had finished watching, I don't remember what series it was. I couldn't remember if it was the Peaky Blinders or if it was something along that nature. It was something with historical fiction, and it might have even been like Hell on Wheels or something.
Yeah.
And I thought, how cool would it be to have a a series about the early bootlegging days of NASCAR and how that was formed? And I tweeted that to NASCAR, not realizing that like later I'd meet someone like you who has kind of put that vision into a book and now trying to turn it into, like a motion picture.
Yeah, and it
So,
is, look, it's a great story. It is the beginnings of NASCAR, right?
mhm,
Like it's how the drivers got started, right?
right.
Like these were just boys, poor boys that were trying to find a way to make a living and saw a need there and started running moonshine and making moonshine in bathtubs in the middle of the woods. And and learn that, hey, I'm good at driving. Now let's all get together and I think it started with like drag races, right? Like,
Hmm.
and then eventually tracks kind of emerged, that kind of oval that we know today. Um, but, and then it became something that was at some point at the advent of NASCAR profitable for people.
And Daytona Beach and how that started, racing right next to the waves. That was I love that. I love that picture that shows when they first raced on the beach and then it intersected with the highway
Oh,
and then
yeah.
and
I've seen that.
um it's crazy to see how it's developed and it's evolved into what it is today. And to me, like I love football as much as the next person in baseball too, but I think NASCAR is like the ultimate like Americana sport just
I
because
agree.
of the roots of it and how it formed. I mean, it's like it's an unbelievable story of like what's like the most American thing? Well, to me, it's like it's rebelling against the government
Exactly. Yeah.
and American muscle cars and alcohol. So, it doesn't get
Yeah.
much more, it doesn't get more American than that.
I agree with you, and the fact that it seems like when you take people's freedoms away, when you tell them they can't drink, what do they want to do, right? They want to drink.
Yeah,
So prohibition kind of started this whole thing, but thank God for it because now we have NASCAR, which a lot of people probably don't realize that the running of moonshine actually went well past prohibition, because even
right.
past prohibition it was still so heavily taxed. The liquor was so heavily taxed that a lot of these guys that had been running moonshine they couldn't make any money on their farms because the soil was just kind of crap in that area.
Hmm.
And so they weren't making a lot of money with their crops like corn and whatever. So they're like, hey, we were making way more money when we were running moonshine, so let's just keep doing that. So it really went well into the 70s. There's even a story, you could look this up, where they found an old moonshine, a whole distillery underneath a racetrack somewhere in North Carolina. It's in
That
it's
was
in
that
my
not,
book.
that was North Wilkesboro, wasn't it?
North Wilkesboro. Yeah, that's what it was.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. So they found it during a race because I think it was something to do with like the flies. Like the flies were kind of navigating toward this concession stand when they shouldn't have been, and they kept seeing trucks of delivering massive amounts of yeast to the to the uh, to the racetrack. And I think the racetrack promoters or whoever's running it was like, well, this is for the hot dog buns and all this stuff. And they're like, man, you must be selling a lot of like hamburgers and hot dogs out of that concession stand in this little small town track. And come to find out, when you bury deep into the surface, the cops found, or under the ground, the cops found like it was a major distillery down there. I mean, they were mass producing this stuff. And that was like I don't know if you know the year, but it was like mid 70s.
Yeah. And this might be, maybe I'm thinking of the wrong track because I know that more recently was when that that North Wilkesboro one was found. So this might have been a different track, but I'm sure that there are several tracks where this was the case.
Several tracks where they built, like the concession stand was kind of the common thing to do, is build it
Hmm.
over the distilleries, and then there would be a trap door at the bottom of it, and then you would burrow down into the ground, like into a basement kind of
Hmm.
subterranean level, and you would have this just massive, I think one of them was like they had like 2 or 3 thousand gallon
Holy
barrels and
moly.
stuff down there. Yeah. And you couldn't, because it was underground, you couldn't hear it, because I don't know if you know much about the way they used to moonshine, but the machines themselves, or the barrels themselves, would make, there was something called a thumper. And they called it that because it made like this thumping sound, and it was
Hmm.
very, very loud, which is another reason they were kind of hidden in these different areas. Obviously you couldn't hear that from underground. There's a part in the book too where my dad he's looking for his grandfather, and he had put the distillery in the back part of the barn behind the pigsty, because he figured if it even got to the farm, they wouldn't want to go in the barn. And even if they got in the barn, the last place they'd want to go was past the pigsty, right? Because it
Hmm.
was gross.
Right.
And so my dad, here's my grandfather, and here's like this classical music, which he used to love to play. And he's like, but where is he? I can't find him. And he had built the whole distillery, not only behind the pigsty, but had burrowed down into the ground and built a whole thing down there with a bomb shelter and everything.
Oh my gosh.
This was also back during, Cold War, when JFK
Hmm.
had told everybody, like, look, we need to prepare for something. So a lot of people in the South, I remember even my grandfather had a bomb shelter
Hmm.
in his basement. But that was a common place to kind of put distilleries as well.
Well, I think we're getting close to wrapping up for this first episode, but what can people expect with future releases of the podcast? We got some special guests coming up too. We're reaching out to. We got a few people kind of lined up. But kind of just tell people a little bit more about what this podcast is about and kind of some of the themes that people can look forward to and what's on the horizon.
Yeah, so so the podcast is really going to be about just racing, families, legacy. I want to really get
Hmm.
back to the people behind the cars. We talk. I think NASCAR right now it's a wonderful sport, and it gets really shiny. And the cars, we focus on the
Hmm.
cars and the teams and the sponsors and all this. But I want to get back to the drivers, like. Who are the men behind the wheel or the women behind the wheel? So I think we've got
Yeah.
some NASCAR drivers, a female NASCAR driver that is going to be on the show, some NASCAR influencers, maybe some of the people that used to know my dad, some of the crew members and friends and people from back then that could give some really cool stories. What am I missing? Anything, really, just anything Southern too. We can talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Faith, family, legacy.
Yeah,
We did a really fun interview with your friend Jim, who had some really cool stories to tell. We got some cool footage of that, which will be coming out soon. And he's got some great stories. We'll have to have him on the show too. Um, and we will do a little bit of NASCAR recap too, just kind of talk about the current landscape, kind of comparing to the old days and making
I
some
like
cool
that.
connections there, and also just connecting with, like you said, both maybe if we can get some current drivers on, some retired drivers, some people kind of more behind the scenes. I know you've got a friend who has one of your dad's cars,
That's right.
in great condition, by the way. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the only known existing original car of his, correct?
That's right. It's the only one. And he remodeled the whole thing. It's on my Instagram page. You can see the photos of it. I'm going to be buying that car, hopefully, in the future. But maybe we could even get Johnny on because he's got some cool
Yeah.
stories about my dad. But yeah, like you said, anything racing, anything Southern, anything just real American, like Middle America. That's what we're going for here.
Yep. And we love having people on that are passionate about racing and whether they are behind the wheel or spectating or whatever. We're just really excited to continue this and have some cool conversations and share some cool stories.
That's right.
But you want to show everybody the shirt that you're wearing? This is one of our merch items here.
Oh, yeah.
This is
Check this out.
Stick Elliott in his number 18. This was one of the NASCAR Grand National cars that he raced for Toy Bolton. He raced the number 18 car most of his NASCAR career. So this was a design that we put together here. We also got this hoodie here with our Stick Elliott King of Dirt logo that I made here.
I love that
So that's
logo.
fun. We also have some hats available. We've got a nice trucker hat here. We got a rope golf cap here. And then on our website, you can see some other really great stuff that we have just added to the online store as well. All right. Thank you everyone for watching our first episode. You can follow Gina at her on her Instagram. You can also check out her website and our online store where you can purchase the book. All the links are there, genaelliott.com. The book is available on Amazon. It's also available on Audible. You can buy it at Barnes& and Noble. Um, we are planning to release this podcast every couple of weeks. Perhaps we'll do more weekly as the show progresses. But um, yeah, we appreciate you guys following along. Be sure to share this video, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.